Hello there, welcome to the Ebon Hawk, a podcast discussing Star Wars news and Knights of the Old Republic. Today we get back to recapping Knights of the Old Republic and bring you to Dantooine. Spoiler alert for the Knights of the Old Republic series and the Star Wars films and TV shows. This is where the Shroud of the Dark Side begins. In our recap of KOTOR, we are now hurtling from the destroyed ruins of Taris to Dantooine. The Ebon Hawk crew lands on Dantooine at the Jedi Enclave. Dantooine, there's not a whole lot of people or urban centers, and what I like about the Enclave is it's not a temple a la Coruscant. It's kind of just a smaller placeholder, like a site off the main hub, and
it's not as grand as the Jedi Temple from Coruscant, but it's still definitely like temple-esque, just not on like a major like metropolis scale that the Coruscant one is.
Yeah, it's probably because 2003 graphics really couldn't pull off a good Coruscant. But yeah, Dantooine is probably my favorite planet in KOTOR. The environment is evocative of, like, African plains, and it reminds me a bit of the Midwest, too, in the United States. After being in a corrupt city, Dantooine feels safe. You get to connect with nature. And I think even some of the characters say, like, Dantooine's a great place for mental and spiritual healing. But at the same time, something does kind of feel off. And as the story goes on, it kind of makes sense. But Mission is down after Taris is destroyed. And she's kind of the face of, like, Taris's destruction. And I think if you don't have a local to, like, really kind of feel it, it doesn't hit hard as much. One thing I do find kind of lacking is Bastila's reaction. I think Bastila would feel more guilty after the Sith destroyed Taris to get to her. So she'd probably be sad or guilty. And speaking of Bastila, she goes to the council to talk about recent developments. And then after she speaks to the council, they want to speak to Revan. And Karth is the one telling this to you. Karth's spider sense is tingling. And when you kind of replay it, the more and more I replay it, I'm kind of like, Karth's paranoia really does make sense to me because he was betrayed by someone he trusted, and people he trusts right now, Bastila, are lying to him, And Revan doesn't know that he's Revan, but that doesn't change the fact that he's Revan, and people are keeping it a secret from him. And then the Jedi Council is made up of Master Zar, and then Vrook, who's voiced by the one and only Ed Asner, and then Vandar is voiced by Tom Kane, who is a great Star Wars voice actor who I don't think gets enough credit. They should get more. And Dorak. I kind of think that Atris should be here, because I feel like she would totally be down for, like, shady stuff, like wiping a Sith Lord's identity. And I think the council, it's kind of just a whole lot of guys. I think they need at least a girl on there, just for variety's sake. But some KOTOR 2 masters like Kavar, Zez-Kayel, and Vash are on Coruscant on the High Council. So that's where they are.
When you meet the council, there's a lot of similarities between the Dantooine Council and the Coruscant Council from the Phantom Menace. It's another one of those like Easter egg placeholders of like calling back to the visual Star Wars material to the video game.
They could have had a bit more variety with Vandar, but it is interesting to see what a Yoda would look like in 2003 BioWare graphics. So, and I guess we have to remember, we'll probably talk about this later, but when Knights of the Old Republic was in development, Attack of the Clones wasn't out yet. The Phantom Menace was the first Star Wars film that had come out in recent memory, so they really had to kind of go along with what the Phantom Menace and the original trilogy established, even though they were 4,000 years before that. Bastila wants to get the protagonist trained, and Vrook is like, are you certain that Revan is dead? And for people paying attention, you'd kind of be like, what does that mean? You know, that sounds suspicious. Revan's totally dead. What do you mean? And I was reading the Knights of the Old Republic book by Alex Kane, and in the book they said that the writer of the game says a good twist is a good twist if about 10% of the people can predict the twist. Because you don't want it to be too obvious, but you don't want it to come out of nowhere. And I think they did a pretty good amount of foreshadowing throughout the game, if you go back and kind of think about it. And I think that they did a good job with the revelation vision after Malik tells you the truth. But yeah, Bastila and Revan go on to share a vision or a dream of Revan and Malik taking their first steps into the dark side, finding a star map behind like a sealed archway in the ruins on Dantooine. And what I noticed is the star map kind of looks like a star forge. So it's a kind of cool design. And one thing I was kind of thinking about is like maybe each star map can be unlocked in kind of a more epic way. And each way could be different, just so it's not repeated each time. And I know that's how it happens in the game, but in a movie, you definitely want to make the way you find a star map as iconic and as visually cool as possible.
Or change the focus, kind of like what we were talking about, to have the focus be more on the architectural ruins, which would point to like the main, or like the star map, which would then take it to the Star Forge. Because I don't know, I think for me personally, I'm a little over it for like treasure hunting for pieces that are basically the same thing to then take it somewhere else.
Yeah. I am kind of thinking, though, like, each star map and, like, where you find the star map could look different. Like, maybe one kind of has more of an aquatic theme and, like, is kind of focused on, like, the tide or something. And then on Kashyyyk, it's kind of more about, like, life or something. And just, like, they each look different, like, artists could have a fun field day coming up with like ways to kind of make them look Rakatan but look different and be fun, I think. So Bastila and Revan share that vision, and they can each kind of sense each other's presence in the dream. And in the next episode, we'll talk about how we would visualize a force bond, and we'll have some of your responses on how to do that. Because I think it does take some thinking, but I think it can be simple. But in a movie, you don't want to tell, you want to show people what's happening. And I think there are some parallels with Rey and Kylo in episodes 8 and 9, so we'll get to that. Then there's kind of like a montage, and Revan is learning as a student. He's learning really quickly, and everyone just kind of goes on and on about fate, you know, if there's any coincidences or if things are going your way. It's just the will of the Force. It's fate, you know? But in the montage, there are vibro blades, in the season 2 of the Mandalorian premiere recap, I forgot to mention that the Gamorreans had vibroblades. So, yeah. So at least they're canon, in the current Star Wars canon. So
They've
that's
always
great.
kind of been canon because, like that, like in Return of the Jedi, you can see vibroblades. They,
Yeah.
I think
I
with the technology of the time though, it was more or less limited on how they showed it. But yeah, those Gamorrean guards still kind of always wielded those.
guess we just didn't see what they were capable of. They could have just been blades, but now we're for sure seeing vibroblades.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then Revan goes on to meditate and study, and Bastila is there kind of working with him, and he's only been there like a few weeks as a Padawan, but he's really kind of excelling. And I kind of just wonder, like, even though his memory is wiped, like, would there be muscle and force memory? Like, what do you think, Coden?
Well, I would want more than just recalling and excelling everything. I would like to see some form of like unlock process, I guess you could say, with his mind to the Force. And then, well, yeah, I just think that like a character that already excels at things isn't really that fun to follow and like just watch on screen. And so I
Yeah.
would just want more development. And even if we see a little bit of that up into the point of Dantooine, I'd still want to see a lot of recalling to what had happened in the past and then using that to help unlock his potential at the temple later.
Yeah. In the montage, he does like take some hits, but then he kind of starts with vibroblades and he gets kind of hit a bit, but then he kind of fights and is able to take some hits and kind of deliver some blows. So, I mean, you do see some growth, but I think it
Be
would
cool
just
to
be...
see some sparring sessions between Revan and Bastila.
Yeah.
Kind of using her as a mentor figure for kind of like retraining the Force and what lightsaber combat, things like that.
I mean, you could even just be like, here's a move that took me forever, like at a certain point, and then it's like he kind of gets it in a few tries, and it's like, oh crap, like maybe we didn't wipe the memory as much as we thought we did. Or like, maybe they have like the Jedi Padawans on Dantooine kind of have a hazing ritual, like on the sparring mat, then it's like, wait, like, how did he know about that? And just be like, what's going on? And then Bastil's like, that's a really cool coincidence, the will of the Force just works like that. So don't question it.
Maybe some accidental Force lightning. I don't know.
That would be dumb, in my humble opinion, but yeah.
Not like it's been done before.
Montages are great. There's ways to do it, kind of spice things up, and it would be fun to see people train, because especially like in a temple enclave setting, because I mean we've seen Luke train a bit, like on Dagobah and on the Millennium Falcon, not much else. And then Anakin, we kind of don't really see him train in the temple. It's you kind of just have that 10 years, and it like goes from him as a 10-year-old, and then he's hitting on Padme as a 20-year-old, and
you do see the younglings in Attack of the Clones with under the instruction of Yoda a little bit.
It would just be cool to see more training, so that could be a fun opportunity. And one of the things they teach you is the Jedi Code. I can't quite remember the origin of the Jedi Code. It might be from a comic or something, or from like a novelization. I'll double check that. But the Jedi Code is: there is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. And fast forward a bit to our Korriban episode, but the Sith Code was invented for Knights of the Old Republic, and some people are like, yeah, I find the Sith Code really inspiring. And I'm like, that's great. And when I say great, I mean not great, because how the writer came up with it, he's like, I'll just read some speeches by Hitler so I can really kind of tap into like that evilness, you know, in that mentality of like selfishness, and then I'll create the Sith Code. And that's kind of how he was able to write it. And then I think a lot of people don't know that, and I'm like, maybe let's not tattoo the Sith Code to yourself, you know? But yeah. And then coming up quickly, it'll be our next topic. We will discuss what kind of Jedi Class Revan should be in a movie. Because there is Jedi Guardian, Consular, and Sentinel. And the reason there are different Jedi classes is so that there's lore reasons behind the different lightsaber colors, because Lucasfilm at the time was like, we can approve blue, green, and red lightsaber colors. End of list. And I mean, when you're designing a game, you want to have choices of lightsaber colors. So they're like, if we can create like a really good lore reason, I'm sure Lucasfilm can get behind it and we can get more lightsaber colors in the game. And this kind of does make sense with, even if you incorporate the movies, like Jedi Guardians are kind of more about strength and valor and fighting skills, and Consulars are about like wisdom, negotiation, and working on the Force powers. And Sentinels are kind of about finding a balance and all that. And then Jedi Guardians typically have blue lightsabers, Jedi Consulars have green, and Sentinels have yellow. So then they were able to incorporate more colors. And then I think there's also purple, and there's also orange in the game. In Knights of the Old Republic 2, you get more colors, and nowadays it's like if you think it's a lightsaber color now, and we even have a dark saber, so it's a different time. In a future episode, we'll kind of talk about like how they could maybe differentiate the Guardians, Consulars, and Sentinels, and some High Republic concept art. But I just want to say I don't want it to be like Divergent or like Hogwarts houses. Just kind of like some subtle differentiations, you know? But Revan's canonical lightsaber is purple, so it kind of tells the player Revan can be anything. And the way he's kind of written, you can really kind of think he was anything. But I kind of think in an adaptation, you really do need to see Revan create a lightsaber, because we've never really on screen seen in live action someone create a lightsaber. I mean, there's been some Clone Wars episodes and they're great. And there's a deleted scene where Luke finishes a lightsaber. But I think this would be a good opportunity to like really give a great capstone to a good training montage. And I kind of think his new hilt could be a hybrid of his Jedi and Sith saber. What do you think it should look like?
Well, if they stick to more of like the Legends version of building a lightsaber, I think it would definitely work with having a hybrid or close to one or the other for his lightsaber hilt. Because you're kind of in a more or less like an unconscious or dream state when you're constructing that lightsaber, and so it would make sense to build something quite similar. If they went with more of like a canon approach, then it could wind up being anything, like whatever's laying around in the temple drawers at the time or something.
Well, I mean, if you watch the Clone Wars and Fallen Order, it seems to go along with Legends pretty well. Like, it's kind of more like a vision is how they construct it. I just think Revan's lightsaber would definitely be purple. As kind of an initiate on Dantooine, maybe it's like his lightsaber kind of looks like design-wise somewhere between his Jedi saber, like with the Star Forge on it, and his red Sith saber that looks like Qui-Gon's. Even though I'd kind of switch, I think, the red blade to like the Star Forge-y one, and then like the Jedi one to kind of the Qui-Gon style one. So maybe like you could have something in between those two designs. So
I would more expect, like, if they went with more of a Legends lore for the lightsaber. The amethyst crystal is unique to like a single location, and they use it as like a reward, kind of like a like the Nobel Peace Prize, for example. And that's how Mace Windu ends up getting his in the legend lore. And so it's curious on how Revan gets the amethyst crystal originally, because it's possible that he did end up picking it up on that same planet. But I don't know any of that lore on how he got that crystal, for how they decided to put it for KOTOR. But like, I would rather him not get another purple crystal in KOTOR, as like if we were to keep it more on the legend side of things, it's not something that's readily available.
Oh, I would just be like, I don't even know if that's in the new canon, and probably only a few people still remember that, so I would just be like, purple is Revan's color, because it can be anything, and I think they would want to have more people have purple lightsabers in the future. So I would just be like, Revan can have a purple lightsaber, and it doesn't mean everyone and their dog will end up getting one, but I think it would make sense to have him keep a purple blade, because in every iteration of like Jedi Revan and even like Sith Revan, when he's dual wielding, he has a purple blade. So yeah, I don't think it would make sense to change that to go along with like old canon that might not even be canon anymore about Mace Windu's purple blade. And then before we conclude our Dantooine recap for this episode, the Jedi Council gives you a test after you construct your lightsaber. They want you to go to the ancient groves in the southeast corner from the temple, because Master Quattro is injured and the dark side has been sensed there. And we'll go over the source of that in the next episode. And yeah. And then before we move on to what Jedi class we think Revan would be, I just wanted to say that we're thankful for everyone who listens and subscribes and shares our podcast, and we just want to say we know that there are more Knights of the Old Republic fans out there, and we know there's a whole lot of Legends fans out there, and we know there's a whole lot of Star Wars fans who would love our podcast, and the way we can reach more of them is for you to continue to subscribe and listen and share our podcast with your friends, because we can't reach everyone, but with all of our listeners, I know we can reach more of them and kind of share the KOTOR love, and together we can achieve a great many things. And as always, we're just thankful, and may the Force be with you. All right, we asked our listeners, what Jedi class is Revan? And 60% said Guardian, 13% said Jedi Consular, and 27% said Jedi Sentinel. Coden, what do you think Revan is?
So I'm pretty sure he's a Jedi Consular. The reason for it is, I mean, like, he is a very skilled like duelist, but at the same time he spends a lot of study on kind of like all aspects of the Force, and which is kind of what initially leads him down the path that he took before kind of the events of KOTOR. A lot of Jedi that kind of go down that path tend to be consulars, and so I think it just makes the most sense that he too was a consular before.
Yeah. I like these results more because there's a lot more variety, because usually it would just be 90% one thing. So it's kind of just cool to see some different numbers all over the place. But I honestly think that he was probably a Jedi Consular, kind of tied with Jedi Guardian. But the way he is written, I think it was intentional. The way he was written is, you can hear things about him and you can be like, oh, I think he was a Sentinel, or oh, I think he was a Consular, or oh, I think he was a Jedi Guardian. But the way Kreia describes him in KOTOR 2 is like, looking at him was like looking into the heart of the Force. So while he was a good warrior and a good duelist and a good tactician, I think he was more about understanding and using the Force, and he uses the Force to probably amplify his fighting abilities. And I mean, he could also work on droids like HK-47, but I definitely think he was a consular as well. Ironic.design said, I say Guardian. He was pretty gung-ho to lead an army against the Mandos and then have the mentality to continue that war with the Republic and then to lead another charge during his redemption on Malak and the Sith. He charges a lot. What do you think of that comment?
I mean, that's also true. I mean, I think with consulars kind of supporting the consular idea is that, you know, their major study is the Force, where Guardian's study is a lot of like hand-to-hand combat. I don't think it's out of place to say that Revan would have been a good Guardian. I just think that it fits better as a consular. I mean, you have Jedi like Yoda who are incredible duelists, but they rely so much on the Force to get them there. Yeah. And so, but I mean, I think between all three roles, there's, I mean, you can definitely blur them all together, especially from Guardian to Consular and then Consular to Sentinel. I don't really think so much Sentinel to Guardian, but as far as like the line between those three in more or less that order, I think from what you earlier said, you can kind of see Revan in a lot of different ways, but I think Guardian or Consular are both very valid responses.
Galactic Artwork said, I think Revan was likely a consular given his thirst for knowledge, and I mean, that's probably true. Like, I think his curiosity kind of took him down some interesting paths on the light and the dark side, but what do you think?
No, I mean, I agree with this. Revan did have a thirst for knowledge of the Force, and that's very consistent with the consular.
And blue milk, you know? So,
yeah.
I agree. And then this is probably the winner for most interesting name, you know? Confused Pooper? Yeah, that's a fun name, but I say Sentinel. He's the definition of balance, Jedi to Darth to Jedi. Plus, he cared about real-world issues, hence why he entered the Mandalorian War against the Jedi Order's commands. He is extremely skilled with the saber, and is one of the only other Jedi strong enough in the Force to use Darth Treya's Force Saber ability. So, there is a lot of variety, so...
The only thing that I have an issue with this statement is the comment that he's like, well, that a Sentinel is balanced between Jedi and or Dark Jedi and Sith. And that's, I mean, with a Sentinels are very concerned about like what's going on locally and just keeping peace to essentially where they're stationed. And so like for them to be very involved in a civil war makes a lot of sense. But as far as an interstellar war like the Mandalorian War was, is definitely more of a place for a guardian or consular, in my opinion.
Yeah, because we do see Jedi Sentinels, like Jedi Temple Guards in the Clone Wars and Rebels. They have yellow sabers, and it's kind of like it was jury duty to defend the Jedi Temple. Because I think it was kind of a lot of the traditions with Jedi Sentinels were lost through the ages.
Just the general lore of the Sentinel is that they tend to be assigned to a location and they stay there. And
Yeah.
so we definitely see Sentinels at Coruscant. That's I mean that's in a lot of Star Wars lore, but in some of like the background, especially like Legends lore, typically guardians or consulars, they go out to planets to meet with a Sentinel among also the rest of the local government, but they kind of have that Sentinel as a liaison between them as the Coruscant representatives to the local government.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see how they do it in KOTOR. I mean, it does kind of make sense that Bastila, if she was kind of assigned to like do these different assignments for the council, that it would kind of make sense because she's a sentinel. But yeah, sentinels are kind of more connected to the day-to-day and maybe not doing as grand of things as like Yoda and Anakin and Obi-Wan, you know? But it would be interesting to see if Jedi Sentinels could have some different, like, real-world specialities. I just said that like Ewan McGregor, but specialities, you know?
I would actually kind of support Bastila as a Sentinel because I think the best training for a Sentinel is to go out with a Guardian or Consular to deal with kind of localized issues. And so they always have the home base of a temple, but they go out and work on these localized issues with this liaison, and then eventually they would then get assigned to a location. They already kind of know what their role is, what their responsibility is. Maybe they have a secondary apprenticeship to an actual Sentinel that's already been posted.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for Bastila to remain a Sentinel.
Yeah. And I think it would kind of, we'll get to this in our next topic too, but like, I think it would make it easier for the Jedi Council to kind of tell her what to do and her to go along with it, kind of without thinking about it. But it would be interesting to see like Jedi Sentinels kind of have different specialities. Like maybe one is like, I'm gonna kind of learn how to do Jedi CSI or something, or I'm going to kind of learn these different skills to kind of like be connected more with like the real world side of the galaxy rather than just like worrying about the Force or like lightsaber dueling techniques, you know? So, and kind of one of my theories for like why Bastila is a Sentinel, it would be because I think that she's kind of more connected with her father, who is like a treasure hunter. And I think like a Sentinel would kind of have more of those skills, and maybe she kind of grew up like kind of learning different skills like that, and she kind of wanted to hold on to it, but that's just kind of my speculation. So I'm not sure if it was ever completely canon what Revan was, but that's what we thought. For our last topic, we asked our listeners, there are contradicting sources. In your opinion, in the first KOTOR, is Bastila a Padawan or a Jedi Knight? And 33% said Padawan, And 67 said Jedi Knight. And I just want to say we were so close to executing Order 66, but then we weren't. So,
just one order over.
Yeah. I think actually Order 67 was to replace a corrupt chancellor with another chancellor. So, in old legends.
But... It was either 65 or 67, which was actually to execute the senator.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if Palpatine actually put in an order to execute himself.
Yeah, maybe it was in case, like, Palpatine got replaced, and then he could just be like, execute Order 65. And then he's like, oh, I guess I was Vice Chancellor, so I guess I'm back, But anyways, back to Bastila. Ironic.designs responded to this question and said, I'm pretty sure the council refers to her as a Padawan often. Anyone like Karth or non-Jedi that may refer to her as a knight, I felt is just the assumption of title and not fully understanding the Jedi stage systems. Although it does seem odd that a Padawan would be given so much freedom and importance on unsupervised missions and treated her like a knight. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is pretty tough because, I mean, again, pulling from Legends here, Padawans don't leave temple at all. They have to be a apprentice or above. And so, like, for her to be a Padawan seems more like a derogatory term from the council, because I do believe that she's actually a knight, but maybe kind of like a kind of in between promotion type scenario. But at the same time, she had to have been an apprentice first before becoming a knight. And so, like, was she an apprentice on Dantooine the whole time, or what ended up happening there? Because typically, like, again, pulling from Legends, if a Padawan doesn't become an apprentice by the age of 13, then they end up just
becoming a farmer.
Well, that was kind of what Obi-Wan was afraid of. But typically they end up just being a servant at not a servant, but like a paid worker at the Jedi Temple. For example, like a cook or a janitor, something along those lines. But yeah, they wouldn't be a Jedi if they weren't accepted as an apprentice after the age of 13. I mean, maybe she was an apprentice with a lot of leeway, but again, still kind of referred to as Padawan.
Yeah, I mean, Anakin was able to go on an unsupervised mission, and that was a big deal. But when the Clone Wars hit, you would see Ahsoka sometimes go on some solo missions, and I think that was just kind of like wartime exceptions. So I'm sure,
Clone Wars, they were both apprentices. So, well, technically, Anakin was a knight in the Clone Wars TV show.
Yeah.
But Ahsoka was definitely an apprentice, and I think they mixed up the term Padawan in there, but she's absolutely an apprentice in that show.
I mean, I can talk about the Jedi stages after this comment, but the next comment is from Astrodroid, and he said, I think maybe something not quite at knight level, but she may be fairly well ranked, being highly skilled with her force ability and being chosen to lead the team to capture Revan and Malak. So, I guess, like, what's your response to that? And then I can respond.
I mean, there aren't very many ranks in the Jedi Order. And so, if she wasn't a knight, she was either going to be a apprentice or a master, and she definitely wasn't a master. So, I'm pretty confident on the rank of apprentice with Bastila.
So, keep in mind, Attack of the Clones kind of solidified the Jedi stages a bit more, and this came out before Attack of the Clones came out, so I think there was some confusion, and Lucasfilm kind of didn't really elaborate on it to them. But I definitely see Bastila as a Padawan still. And I've always just kind of seen the Jedi stages as Padawan, and you don't become a knight until you graduate from being a Padawan. And then when you are a master, I think that means that you've successfully trained someone or you've completed some of the different trials. But I think that Bastila, because she's a prodigy, she's kind of like an honor student Padawan. Because I think in some of the writing, she could be poised, but she could also be snippy. But I think in an adaptation, like I've said before, I think you'd want to age up Bastila a bit, like kind of to the age that Obi-Wan was in The Phantom Menace, which is 25, because I think the original writer had her be 18 or 19, and Revan was 38, so I'm like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. We're not going down that road, because that's a weird road, you know? So I would age Bastila up and age Revan down, in my humble opinion, and I think it would make more sense that she feels held back if she is older, and maybe she just doesn't have to act so much like a teenager, you know? And that's what I think, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, also, I need to read this Count Dooku book, but I'm pretty sure that Count Dooku technically was in a similar boat that Bastila was, where Yoda was on the council as master and probably would send Dooku out on errands as an apprentice and then later knight. And so,
Yeah,
I think,
Dooku Jedi Lost, it's an interesting book,
mhm.
because Yoda's still the Grand Master, but he was still Dooku's master, so
I mean, it takes quite a circumstance for a member of the council to leave Coruscant, and that's something that became more frequent during the Clone Wars. But prior to the Clone Wars, they tended to just stay at the temple unless there was like a very, very necessary circumstance. And so it makes a lot of sense to have, well, if Dooku's role was similar to Bastila's, where maybe Bastila's master was localized on Dantooine and they would send her out to, do whatever task they needed her to do again as
yeah.
an apprentice. But again, I think there could be a lot of lack of respect there, especially because her role is pretty similar to Anakin's, and so for them
Yeah.
to refer her to her as Padawan makes some sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Jedi Council does kind of keep her a Padawan just because she has battle meditation and it's kind of easier to keep her under control. And I think there is a deleted scene where they run into Nemo, and Nemo responds to Bastila and says, "Does your master still dump water on you when you misbehave?" And Bastila's like, "Ha!" So you don't quite know who her master is, but I kind of wonder if once like some battle meditation manifested itself, that the Jedi Council on Dantooine is like, "We're going to adopt you as our collective Padawan, so you're easier to kind of control, and so it helps our war effort." So I think she's like a Padawan with a lot of responsibility, and I think she's given some free reign on some of these assignments, but I think that she really wants to be a knight, and I think if they would have like had her not lie about who Revan is and like kind of believed in her more, I don't think she would have fallen to the dark side. Maybe Padawan braids don't quite exist 4,000 years before, Anakin, but I think she's definitely a Padawan, but like an honor student Padawan.
And Obi-Wan had his braid as Qui-Gon's apprentice. So
Yeah. And then he looked, well, everyone jokes that Obi-Wan resembles Jesus in Attack of the Clones, so
yeah.
you can assume that he got rid of his braid because he was knighted. Yeah, but in the future, we will look at how to visualize the Force bond and battle meditation, and we will fan cast Juhani. So you have that to look forward to, but you can find us on Instagram at the Ebon Hawk Podcast, and the Ebon Hawk can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, as well as everywhere else that Anchor Podcasts are distributed. Subscriptions, reviews, and shares help us out immensely. And our email is ebonhawkpodcast@gmail.com, and you're welcome to email us your questions and business inquiries there.
And then if you want to talk to me, you can find me on Twitch, Instagram, and Twitter just by searching Coden Bond. If you want to talk to me in more of a conversational type, find me on Twitch. Those are usually Thursday evenings. Our intro and outro themes were composed by Alistair Shorman. He can be found at alistairsounds.wixsite.com/alistairsounds. Our transition music was composed by Christian Walker, and he can be found at christianwalkermusic.com.
This has been the Ebon Hawk Podcast. May the Force be with you. We will be back soon. Bye for now.